Your cheating ex violently grabs your wrist in public, and suddenly, a famously dangerous crime boss steps out of the shadows to stop him. Lena gave her cheating ex exactly 10 minutes at a coffee shop to say his piece. When she told him it was over, he snapped and grabbed her arm so hard it left red marks. Nobody in the room moved to help her, except for Adrian Voss. He placed a hand on her ex's shoulder, and with a single quiet sentence, terrified the screaming man into submission. Adrian had been standing there the whole time just waiting for him to cross a line.
The camera closes in on Lena Carter. Notice the violent trembling in her hands. It is the raw physical proof of a soul tearing apart, fueled by 3 rapid shots of cheap agave liquor. Her eyes reflect the terrifying destruction of a 7-year illusion. She types out a text born from sheer agony. I hope you rot. But the reply does not come from the man who shattered her reality. It flashes on the screen from a completely unknown number. This single mistake will drag her into a darkness deeper than she could ever anticipate. Today, you and I are going to unpack this tragedy together. Life teaches us a brutal truth here. Betrayal never just breaks the heart, it infects the bone. Before we examine the anatomy of this obsession, please subscribe and support the channel. Please take a moment to subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment where you are watching from tonight. Now, yourself a warm coffee and let us frame the opening shot. The nightmare begins with a subtle shift in the air. The scent lingering in their apartment is not the expensive cologne Marcus buys from Madison Avenue. It is sickeningly sweet, a heavy, unfamiliar floral perfume. It is the unmistakable trace of another woman's skin pressed intimately against his. Lena stands completely frozen in the bedroom doorway. She is still gripping the warm takeout bag from her long commute, trapped in the agonizing paralysis of denial. We must remember this simple lesson. The most brutal, life-altering truths often do not arrive with a dramatic scream, but with an absolute terrifying silence. The warm container holds orange chicken, his absolute favorite meal. The camera lingers on her face as a profound cognitive dissonance sets in. Her exhausted mind is finally unearthing every tiny lie and late-night excuse she had buried for months. She manages to choke out his name, her vocal cords tight with pure adrenaline. From the bathroom, over the gentle hiss of the running shower, Marcus responds with a sickening casualness. He happily hums a Stevie Wonder melody, totally blind to the catastrophe about to engulf him. She finally does something she has avoided for 7 years. She reaches out and takes his unlocked phone from the dresser. We learn a hard truth here. A narcissist often leaves his phone unsecured, blinded by the arrogant tragedy of believing his lies are bulletproof. The glowing screen delivers an immediate, fatal blow. It is a new message from someone named Brianna, decorated with bright romantic symbols. Her trembling fingers act on their own, tapping the photograph to open it. In an instant, the floor drops out from beneath her reality. The image shows Marcus jog casually in an unfamiliar hotel room. Leaning against crisp white sheets, he wears that soft, intimate smile Lena foolishly believed belonged only to her. The cruelest detail is the date stamped at the top, Tuesday. The exact same Tuesday. Lena spent 14 agonizing hours in a cold hospital ward, gripping her sick mother's hand while Marcus blamed his absence on a punishing deadline. Always remember this vital life lesson. Trust is a piece of fragile glass, and once it shatters, it cuts deep into the skin. He had looked her in the face and sworn he slept at his desk. It was a flawless, coldly calculated lie. Suddenly, the rushing water in the shower stops. She hears the soft friction of a towel drying his skin, his cheerful humming echoing down the hall. Panic hits Lena so hard her hand violently spasms. nearly dropping the phone onto the hardwood floor. Through pure willpower, she sets it down in its exact original spot. She silently drifts into the kitchen, presses both hands flat against the freezing stone counter, and desperately tries to remember how to breathe. Marcus strolls in, completely oblivious to the suffocating tension. He smiles and praises the smell of the food. It is a stark reminder to us all. You can be comfortable in your daily routine, entirely unaware that your whole world has just ended. She refuses to look at him. Staring straight ahead, she simply asks who Brianna is. The silence that follows is thick and suffocating. It is the exact reaction of a predator caught outside its carefully built cage. You might be wondering the exact same thing I did when I first analyzed this behavior. How does a narcissist recalibrate when trapped? I count the seconds. 1, 3. She finally turns to face him, detailing the hotel photograph in a dead, hollow voice. You can almost see the tiny, rapid twitch in Marcus's jaw. He is frantically calculating his own damage control. Instead of offering an ounce of genuine remorse, he goes on the attack. He violently deflects, screaming about her, invading his digital privacy. The lesson here is timeless. When a liar is finally exposed, they will always attack your methods instead of owning their devastating mistakes. Lena's voice cracks right down the middle. It is a tiny fracture of weakness that instantly fills her with self-disgust. The tragic irony pours out of her. She paints the brutal contrast between her agonizing hours in a sterile hospital room, watching doctors intubate her dying mother while he was wrapped in hotel sheets with a stranger. Marcus steps forward, raising his hands to pacify the room, demanding she lower her voice. That single, pathetic command unleashes a feral primal rage she never knew she possessed. Lena begins to scream, hurling the sheer weight of their 7 devoted years against his shallow betrayal. And Marcus? He falls back on the most common empty defense of a guilty man. He looks her in the eye and calls her delusional. Remember this vital truth. The ultimate weapon of a deceiver is making the victim doubt their own crystal-clear reality. As observers of this tragic human theater, you and I can recognize this exact, shattering turning point. Lena watches him frantically try to stitch together a believable lie in real time, and he fails miserably. Under the harsh kitchen lights, she experiences a moment of absolute, freezing clarity. She sees him not as her lover, but as a deeply dangerous stranger who has permanently scarred her soul. She points to the door and demands he leave. He weakly argues that his name is on the lease, but her glare is absolute steel. Marcus finally walks out into the cold night at 9:30. He grabs only a small bag and the expensive watch she bought for his birthday. He reaches out for one last embrace, but she flinches away in pure revulsion. The lesson is profound but simple. When the deceiver's mask finally falls, the sanctuary you thought you built together instantly dies. The heavy, metallic click of the deadbolt echoes through the empty apartment with a terrifying finality. Lena instantly collapses onto the cold ceramic kitchen tiles. She presses her burning cheek against the floor, desperately trying to ground her spinning reality. A sound tears out of her throat that defies description. It is not a gentle sob, nor is it a simple scream of anger. It is the raw, primal frequency of absolute isolation. It is the haunting sound of a woman realizing she has been completely alone in a mirage of a relationship for 7 entire years. We must acknowledge the hardest lesson in life right here. It is discovering that the person holding your hand was never truly there. Her phone suddenly buzzes against the cold floor. It is her fiercely loyal friend Jessica, announcing she is already on her way over. The long, dark fallout of his betrayal has officially begun. Jessica Nguyen has been Lena's truest emotional anchor since they were wide-eyed teenagers trying to figure out the world. Moving with the fierce instinct of a blood sister, Jessica never politely waits for an invitation to fix a crisis. She breaches the front door exactly 8 minutes later. She is armed with a heavy bottle of expensive tequila, a bag of frozen food, and the furious energy of a woman whose darkest suspicions have just been proven right. She instantly takes command of the suffocating room, pouring the burning alcohol into 2 glasses and demanding they drink. Jessica unleashes a torrent of fiery insults at the man who just left, finally giving voice to the countless red flags she had quietly noticed in Marcus over the years. Never forget this simple truth. When your entire world suddenly collapses, true, unwavering friends are the only real cure. You and I can easily chart the desperate trajectory of a broken heart seeking refuge in alcohol. After the 3rd heavy glass, the massive emotional dams holding Lena together completely shatter, leaving her sobbing against the kitchen counter. By the 5th pour, a strange, delirious humor takes over. They find themselves laughing viciously at the weird, uneven shape of Marcus's head. But after the 7th drink, the energy in the room goes entirely dark. The laughter dies, replaced by a cold, venomous rage that only surfaces when a victim fully realizes how long they have been played for a fool. Lena grabs her phone, desperate to hurl her hatred directly at her abuser. Jessica forcefully yanks the device away to protect her. It is a powerful lesson in processing deep grief. Sometimes, we need a loyal friend to stop us from drinking the very poison we meant for our enemies. Through a heavy haze of tears and alcohol, Lena articulates a sharp truth about surviving trauma. She whispers that if she does not force this poison out of her system right now, it will fester in her bones forever. She desperately begs for a compromise. She promises she will only type out the words, just to see them bleed onto the bright screen. But she swears she will not actually press send. Jessica silently studies her fractured friend for a long moment and finally steps back. Lena grips the glowing phone with violently shaking hands. She pours every ounce of her broken soul into a furious digital manifesto. She brands him a pathetic coward, a chronic liar, and prays that time rots his hollow heart. The camera closes in tightly on her trembling thumb, hovering over the blue arrow of release. This brings us to a timeless life lesson. Unspoken words can poison the mind, but once released into the world, they become dangerous, unstoppable weapons. Let us pull the camera back to this precise, irreversible second. This is the moment her fate is sealed. A simple slip of the thumb, and the message flies into the digital void, completely out of reach. Beside her, Jessica watches the screen glow in the dim room, instantly trying to reframe the disaster as some twisted form of karma. But the lens stays on Lena. The sound of her friend fades into a muffled hum. The cold, blue light of the phone shows the sheer shock pooling in her wide eyes. The number above the text does not belong to the man who spent years breaking her spirit. It is a total unknown, a ghost in the machine. It is a hard truth of life that one careless mistake can easily open a door we never even knew was there. Stick with me here, because this is where the shadows deepen and the real nightmare takes shape. The glowing interface shows 10 raw, unassigned digits. It is a total rupture of her reality. Lena speaks, her voice cracking like dry wood, telling her friend the venom went to the wrong soul. Jessica steps into the frame, pressing against Lena to anchor her down. She spins a comforting lie, insisting it is just a sleeping stranger who will delete the angry words by sunrise. For 11 agonizing seconds, the camera holds steady. Lena exhales. Her trembling shoulders drop as a fragile illusion of safety wraps around them. But life often reminds us that turning a blind eye to a problem rarely makes it disappear. The silence shatters. The phone vibrates. Both women freeze. Jessica holds her hands over the device, begging Lena not to look. She fully expects another vicious strike from Marcus. But the compulsion of a wounded heart is a tragic thing to watch. Lena opens the message anyway. The words on the glass are chillingly composed. You've a beautiful rhythm when you type angry, almost musical. I assume this was not meant for me. Jessica's instincts scream danger, urging her friend to block the caller right away. Yet, beneath the haze of cheap wine and exhaustion, a deep dread anchors itself in Lena's bones. You can see the cold spreading through her veins. Stripped of logic, her thumbs betray her, typing out a tragic surrender. I am so sorry. It is a painful lesson that we often seek out conversation with the very darkness that hurts us. Let us zoom in on this single frame. This is where the psychological jaws snap shut. Lena sends her desperate excuse, blaming the alcohol, swearing the words were meant for her ex. 3 slow beats pass. Then, the stranger, forget much, Lena. The sight of her own name drains the blood from her face. She stops breathing. Jessica shatters the heavy silence, her voice rising into pure panic as she demands to know how this ghost knows her identity. Block him right now, she pleads. Lena's thumb hovers above the glowing red option to sever the connection. Every instinct demands she retreat, but the unknown is hypnotic. Her hand drifts away from the button. She steps into the abyss. It proves a sad reality that unchecked curiosity can easily become our own worst enemy. She types the question, "How do you know my name?" The reply cuts through the quiet room with terrifying precision. It paints a picture from 3 weeks ago, outside a dim restaurant on 52nd Street. The message replays the memory perfectly. Lena, weeping after a bad fight, colliding with a stranger, calling herself a mess. It repeats his exact reply. Do not apologize. Messy nights are sometimes the honest ones. As Lena reads this, the room's noise drops away. Her throat turns to ash. The buried memory resurrects itself. The heavy stench of gin, the searing humiliation as Marcus tore down her dignity in public, the blinding urge to run. Life teaches us a hard lesson here. The wounds we refuse to heal from will always make us a target for those who watch from the shadows. The buried memory snaps into sharp focus. She can almost feel the rough wool of a dark coat against her shoulder. She remembers a soothing voice offering grace, right before Marcus's cruel grip clamped down on her sleeve. Turning slowly, her face washed in pale light, Lena whispers the confession. She really did meet this ghost. Jessica's mind fractures, demanding how a bump on the sidewalk ends with a stolen phone number. Before the question even settles, the screen flashes again. Breathe. Lena, I am not going to hurt you. The watcher can somehow see her chest heaving in panic. The device slips from her fingers, hitting the floor with a hollow thud. It is a harsh truth that genuine safety is almost never found by blindly trusting the motives of an unknown savior. Jessica fiercely reclaims her role as protector. She drops to her knees, swearing to shut this madness down. But the screen is already flooding with details. The watcher reports that Marcus is sitting in a garage on 41st Street. He is drinking heavily with the woman who broke Lena's heart and plans to drive here in 40 minutes. The text maps out the abuser's pathetic apology tour, ordering Lena to lock the deadbolt. The sheer omniscience of the message paralyzes the room. Jessica's confidence burns out, replaced by a trembling whisper. What did you invite in? In the dark corners of Lena's mind, a horrifying clarity begins to take shape. It is a vital life lesson. When we drop our boundaries out of pure desperation and pain, we often accidentally invite far worse monsters to cross our threshold. Let us think about this together. How could a stranger possess such intimate knowledge of her tormentor's vile habits? Shaking, Lena claws the phone back and types a desperate plea. Who are you? 50 slow seconds stretch into an eternity, pulling her anxiety tighter like a piano wire. The response bleeds onto the screen, revealing a terrifying portrait of a self-appointed savior. He confesses to watching her suffer in the shadows for 3 entire weeks. He commands her to lock the doors, validating the emotional wounds Marcus inflicted. The screen fades to black at exactly 11:47 p.m. 37 minutes later, a thunderous fist slams against the apartment door. The hard truth of life is that people who claim they want to save us often just want to own us entirely. The man outside the heavy wood door is indeed the monster himself. His fists batter the frame in aggressive, entitled rhythms. His slurred voice leaks through, twisting sweet nicknames into toxic demands for entry. Jessica lunges forward, dragging Lena away from the threshold. She sees the tragic softening in Lena's eyes, that deeply ingrained instinct to surrender to the man who breaks her. Jessica grips her shoulders, fiercely whispering the terrifying truth. The shadow on the phone predicted every single step of this drunken nightmare. The realization that an invisible phantom is orchestrating the night turns the blood in Lena's veins to ice. She cannot move a muscle. Life teaches us a brutal truth here. Going back to the person who broke us will never ever make us whole again. You and I must pause here to grasp the tragedy of this scene. A faceless stranger understands the man Lena loved better than she ever could. From the hallway, Marcus launches a pathetic lie, roaring that he can see the light in her window. Lena physically recoils in panic. Jessica quickly dismantles the deception. The bedroom window faces a blind alley. It is an impossible lie designed to break her down. Jessica signals for total silence, hoping the monster will exhaust himself. Yet, a narcissist denied is a dangerous thing. Marcus's voice turns into a weaponized roar. He hurls broken apologies through the wood, demanding to see his prize. It is a powerful life lesson. Toxic individuals do not actually desire our love. They only ever want our complete and utter submission. The relentless pounding shatters the walls of Lena's sanity. Jessica pulls her down against the floorboards, wrapping arms around her trembling frame to muffle the noise. We see the profound agony tearing through Lena's mind. She cannot merge the violent beast kicking her door with the charming man who once sat at her family's dinner table. Outside, the slurred begging curdles into vicious demands, flooding the room with terror. Choking on her tears, Lena whispers the fatal words. "We need to call the police." In that exact second, as if the shadows are listening to her pounding heart, the phone vibrates on the floor. Jessica wildly begs her to look away. Lena looks anyway. It proves that maturity means accepting people for who their actions show them to be, not the illusion they once presented. The glowing text reveals a power bordering on the supernatural. "Do not call the police. I have already sent someone. He will be gone in under 4 minutes. Stay away from the door." The gravity of those words drains the strength from Lena's legs, collapsing her against the baseboards. She stammers the terrifying promise to Jessica, whose face twists into pure dread. This is no longer a digital stalker. It is an executioner entering their world. Jessica lunges to tear the phone from Lena's grip. She screams about the grim realities of the news, Fighting to shatter the hypnotic trance this invisible predator has woven around her friend. A crucial truth rings out in this exact moment. When we accept dark, easy fixes for our deepest emotional pain, we almost always end up becoming the ultimate victim. Let us look closely at this room. Jessica stands near the window, a street lamp carving sharp shadows across her face. She begs Lena not to romanticize this invisible predator, but logic is already failing. The stranger knew exactly when Marcus would arrive, down to the minute. How do you argue with that dark precision? Outside, Marcus and his drunken shouting protest the cold night. Then, absolute silence. The audio track of their reality cuts out mid-syllable. It is not a natural quiet, but the suffocating stillness of a heavy, dark force pressing down. You and I both know the cold dread of an abrupt silence. It reminds us of a simple truth. The things we cannot hear are often far more dangerous than the loudest threats. Both women simply freeze, entirely at the mercy of the unseen. The acoustic texture of the hallway shifts. Gone is the erratic, drunken stumbling. Instead, two sets of heavy, perfectly timed footfalls echo through the plaster. This is the deliberate rhythm of apex predators who have absolutely nothing to fear. A deep, measured voice cuts through the tension, politely informing Marcus his night is over. Desperate to hold on to his territory, Marcus tries to resist. We hear a brief, pitiful scuffle, a muffled grunt, then the heavy thud of bone slamming into drywall. It happens with the cold detachment of simply moving a piece of furniture. It leaves us with a necessary life lesson. False pride means absolutely nothing when it comes face to face with true, quiet power. The threat is instantly neutralized, stripped of all dignity. When Marcus speaks again, his voice is just a broken, trembling whisper. His loud grandiosity has been violently ripped away, leaving only a submissive stutter in its wake. Two nameless enforcers herd him toward the exit, like a frightened animal. Heavy elevator gears grind, swallow their cargo, and sink into the shaft, leaving an agonizingly hollow silence behind. Paralyzed by adrenaline, Jessica drops to the floor and crawls toward the doors, desperate for proof. But before Lena can even blink, the glowing screen of her phone pierces the dark room. A new message arrives. The unseen stranger assures her the problem is handled, erased, and forgotten. Here is the ultimate lesson we can take from this. Absolute power rarely ever needs to raise its voice to be heard. The camera pushes in on Lena, capturing the precise moment her reality begins to crack. The text demands she go to sleep, pretending the men were just building security. Stripped bare by exhaustion, she stares at the unnatural light. Her trembling thumbs type 3 simple words. Who are you? The delay hangs heavily in the air before the name finally appears. Adrian Voss. Jessica and her survival instincts flare up instantly. She whispers urgently, asking for the laptop. Lena simply hands it over. Her arms move, but her mind is miles away, floating somewhere near the ceiling. It shows us exactly how human trauma actually works. Sometimes the body has to completely disconnect to survive the shock of what the mind cannot process. A terrifying new reality has already taken root. Come with me. Let us look over their shoulders as the search results load in the dark. The screen illuminates the terrifying footprint of a Shadow King. Headlines flash like warning sirens. A patriarch dead, a son taking over the empire, federal probes stalled. He runs the darkest corners of the city. Jessica and her face contort into pure terror. The biological response of prey, realizing the lion is already inside the house. Lena leans in, fixing on a photograph. Instantly, the blood drains from her face, leaving her skin ice cold. The lesson here is a brutal one we all must face. Past never truly stays buried. The piercing eyes staring back from that glowing screen do not belong to a stranger. They belong to a man she already knows. The camera flashes back, pulling us into the haze of a dimly lit restaurant 3 weeks ago. It was supposed to be nothing, just a fleeting moment of vulnerability over a spilled drink. She looked up into those same grey eyes, and he delivered a line with terrifying precision. Messy nights are sometimes the honest ones. Now, trapped in her apartment, the memory crashes into her with physical force. Lena collapses onto the floor beside Jessica, burying her face in her hands. A volatile sound rips from her throat. A brutal collision between a laugh and a sob. We must learn the hard way that innocence is just a fragile illusion. The human heart shatters when it realizes it has caught the obsessive, unblinking gaze of a true monster. The tragedy has officially begun. The weight of her mistake presses down on her chest, suffocating the last remnants of her normal life. "I sent that text to a Mafia boss," she whispers, her words fracturing. "He sent actual men to my door, desperate to rebuild the shattered walls of their safety." Jessica grips her hands tight, laying out the rules of survival. "Go to bed, call in sick, change the locks, and bury this night forever." It is a deeply tragic human instinct to simply look away from the fire and pretend it is not burning. But locking the door does nothing when the ghost is already inside the house. Here is a sobering truth we must face. You cannot build a physical wall against a predator who has already mapped the fragile architecture of your mind. The invasion is invisible, but it is complete. Jessica offers a final shred of comfort, promising to carry Lena down the rusted fire escape if the door handle so much as twitches. The dark humor pulls a weak laugh from Lena, a tiny release of poison from her blood. But the night is a cruel canvas. Left alone in the dark, the true damage takes root. Lena lies motionless in bed, staring at the ceiling, her phone heavy on the mattress. Every tiny noise in the building is magnified into a threat. The radiator hisses. A car tire hums on the wet pavement. She tries to separate the mundane from the menacing, failing utterly. Here is a quiet truth we all eventually learn. Fear is a terribly lonely room, and true captivity begins the moment you stop trusting your own senses. The dark soil for a trauma bond has just been watered. At 3:14 in the morning, the digital tether pulls hard against her fraying sanity. The phone vibrates. 2 minutes later, it throbs again. "Are you awake, Lena?" Before her exhausted brain can process the danger, her thumbs betray her, typing a single, obedient word. Yes, his next move is a masterpiece of psychological violence. He does not boast about the men he sent. He simply asks, "Are you all right?" He wraps his iron grip in the soft velvet of concern. "I do not know what I am," she confesses into the dark. Then comes the freezing drop of the knife. "You searched my name." He sees her, even through the walls. We often forget a vital lesson about control. The most dangerous cage is not made of iron bars, but of the terrifying belief that someone knows our every move. He paints his madness as a simple matter of survival, calmly typing out that the horrific rumors online are mostly true, promising to explain it later. It is a stunning display of manipulation. Right here, bathed in the cold blue light of the screen, the tragedy shifts. Despite every screaming instinct telling her to run, a piece of her soul feels a strange, magnetic pull. She actually feels seen. This highlights a tragic human flaw we all share. Sometimes, being noticed by a monster feels warmer than being entirely ignored by the rest of the world. Hating her own fingers for moving, she types out the question that seals her fate. "Why are you doing this?" The hook is set deeply, sinking right into the most vulnerable part of her damaged heart. His reply unravels a terrifying web of obsession masked as romantic destiny. He admits he sat in the shadows 3 weeks ago, watching her apologize to a man who did not deserve her grace. He saw her deep empathy, her soft compliance, and he marked her. He confesses to using his vast empire to rip away her privacy, finding her home, her job, and her history. He claims he wanted to stay away, but her text forced his hand. I decided the universe had made a decision I was not willing to argue with. The sheer arrogance is breathtaking. It is a lesson in the oldest lie we tell ourselves to justify our own sins, blaming the stars for the blood on our hands. A villain never believes he is attacking anyone. He genuinely believes he is simply answering a higher, irresistible calling. Lena stares at the screen, her thumbs practically numb, telling him this is the most insane thing she has ever heard. He easily deflects it, softly, renaming his terrifying stalking as simply paying attention. When she confesses she is paralyzed by fear, he offers a warm, false blanket of safety, giving his absolute word she can sleep in peace. She pushes back one last time, asking if the word of a criminal actually means anything. His reply is a masterstroke of dark isolation. To most people, no. To you, it will be. He is drawing a thick black circle around the two of them, erasing the rest of the world entirely. She does not type another word. The screen fades to black. Let this be a warning to us all. The hardest lesson in life is that the deepest cages are always locked from the inside. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? We open on a wide, cinematic shot of total devastation. The morning light bleeds through the blinds, dragging heavy shadows across Lena's exhausted body. She has finally collapsed into a restless sleep. In the background, the mundane grind of Jessica, making coffee echoes at 10:47. But the camera ignores that. It pushes in tight on Lena's phone. 11 missed calls from Marcus, the ghost she cannot shake. Yet the real horror is a single text from Adrian Voss. Black coffee, 1 sugar, waiting at her door. The doorman just let it right through. This is a masterstroke of psychological terror dressed up as simple care. The lesson here is chilling. When a person shows you that boundaries do not apply to them, believe them the very first time. The tension in the room grows thick enough to choke on. Picture the sheer disbelief washing over Lena's face as she begs her friend to check the hallway. The frame cuts to Jessica, stepping back inside. She is holding a steaming cup from a high-end cafe, carrying it like an active grenade. The threat has officially breached the castle walls. We get an extreme close-up of Lena's shaking fingers unfolding a small, crisp card. The handwriting is flawless. The stroke sharp and rigid. Call in sick. Rest today. It ends with a single letter A. Make no mistake, this is not a gentle note from a lover. This is a director calling action on a stage he now owns. It is the cold command of a man taking control of her life, reminding us that true danger often arrives disguised as a quiet favor. Notice the subtle shift in the lighting during this beat. The shadows stretch and deepen as the trauma bond finds its soil. Against every basic instinct of human survival, Lena lifts the paper cup to her lips and takes a sip. It is made with terrifying perfection. The camera pans over to Jessica, whose eyes are dark with a very clinical dread. Listen to the raw, honest desperation in her voice when she delivers the ultimate warning. That man is not a river you can wade into, she whispers. He is a current. Put one toe in, and he drags you out to sea. It is a powerful life lesson for anyone watching. Ignoring the desperate warnings of a true friend is usually the first step toward your own ruin. The moment our heroine drinks that coffee, the dark psychological undertow grabs her by the ankles. Stick with me here, because this is where the dynamic fractures. We watch Jessica lay out the absolute rules of survival. Block his number, erase the man. Go back to being a normal woman grieving a messy heartbreak. On the surface, Lena nods along. She swears she will build that wall, but the lens stays tight on the micro-tremors around Lena's mouth. Jessica has 17 years of shared history with her, and she spots the lie in a heartbeat. The silence that follows is completely devastating. Without saying a single word, Jessica grabs the empty cup, throws it in the trash with a sharp thud, and aggressively packs her bag. The physical anchor is detaching from the ship. It teaches us that you cannot save someone who refuses the life raft. When the door closes, Lena is left utterly alone in the quiet. The protective shield is officially gone. The heavy click of the deadbolt echoes through the apartment like a gunshot. It signals Jessica's exit and leaves our subject completely exposed. Let us just linger on this heartbreaking visual for a second. Lena stays seated at the very kitchen island where her sanity first started to crack. Instead of choosing the safe road, she actively courts the edge. The phone screen glows against her pale skin as she opens the message thread with Adrian. The camera zooms in on her thumb, hovering over the block button. It is an agonizingly long beat of hesitation, but her tragic flaw wins the fight. She types two simple words, "Thank you." She does not hit send, but she does not block him either. It is a harsh reminder that indecision is still a powerful choice. The sudden, harsh vibration of the phone completely shatters the silence. One ring, two, three. You can practically hear her frantic heartbeat bleeding into the audio track. On the fourth ring, the inevitable happens. She answers. Adrian's voice flows through the tiny speaker. It is low, resonant, and terrifyingly calm. "Good morning, Lena." Look closely at the immediate physical toll this takes on her body. A cold sweat breaks across her forehead. Her breathing turns shallow, her chest rising in tight, panicked little bursts. He asks how she slept, his tone heavy with the cruel knowledge that he is the exact reason she could not rest. When she demands to know why he called, the audio picks up a dark, low exhale of pure amusement. It proves that the most dangerous people do not raise their voice. They just wait for you to listen. The dialogue in this scene is an absolute masterclass in psychological warfare. Adrian casually drops the knife, revealing he knows she was frantically searching his name online at 3 a.m. The sacred privacy of her own room has been violated. She tries to fight back, her voice shaking as she calls him a Mafia boss, throwing up flimsy little walls of logic. Though he smoothly parries the blow, painting himself as nothing more than a businessman with a heavy reputation. The lighting catches the deep, bruised exhaustion in Lena's eyes. You can physically see the fight draining out of her muscles. In this gorgeously tragic moment of surrender, her voice cracks, and she admits she has something to tell him. It shows us a hard truth. Exhaustion will often make us open the door for the exact people we should be running from. Picture this dynamic with me, because you and I have seen this tragic dance play out before. Lena gathers the absolute last fragments of her dignity. She firmly announces she is blocking his number, offering a pathetic whisper of thanks for handling her ex. She is desperately trying to write the final scene. But the predator simply takes the pen and rewrites the script. The pitch of his voice drops into a velvet hum that bypasses her brain entirely. He issues one singular, chilling direction: look out the kitchen window. She actually cries out, begging to be spared from this twisted game, but her body betrays her mind. It is a stunning display of human powerlessness. Pulled by an invisible string, her bare feet carry her across the hardwood floor. It is a grim lesson. True control does not need physical chains when fear does the walking for you. The camera follows her right up to the cold glass. Outside, the harsh reality of her brand new world is waiting. A sleek, black sedan idles like a shark in the shallow waters of her quiet street. Through the phone speaker, Adrian coldly narrates the scene. He reveals his men intercepted Marcus just 20 minutes ago. It is a terrifying display of pure territorial dominance. He breaks down her ex with absolute clinical precision, calling Marcus a pathetic, drunk nuisance. Watch the violent shudder that rips right through Lena's spine. The sheer horror finally sinks in. She was guarded, hunted, and entirely surrounded while she slept. She screams into the phone that she never asked for this protection. The villain's voice is as smooth as silk. "I know," he whispers. It reminds us that the most dangerous prisons are often built out of someone else's idea of safety. We are watching the systematic demolition of a human life in real time. Lena frantically lists the crimes against her. She brings up the lurking shadows, the breach of her apartment, the unwanted saviors sitting on her street. His counterattack is devastatingly beautiful in its pure cruelty. He calmly dismantles every single pillar of her life. He weaponizes the tragic memory of her mother's illness. He twists the ugly knife of her ex's betrayal. He even turns her gaze upon Jessica, pointing out that her loyal best friend still left her alone in the dark. The shadows seem to swallow the room as he replaces her broken world with his dark devotion. He admits his obsession began the very second he saw her face. Lena is left breathless. It is a stark warning. Manipulators do not just break your world. They isolate you until they are the only world you have left. The final act of this telephone sequence is pure cinematic manipulation. Adrian grants her the beautiful, incredibly hollow illusion of free will. He tells her to go ahead and block him, promising that his shadowy guards will watch over her for 3 more nights regardless. By painting his terrifying obsession as some kind of honorable duty, he completely disarms her righteous anger. And then comes the ultimate power move. He hangs up, the line goes dead, cementing him as the undisputed author of her reality. We push in tight on Lena's fractured expression as her moral compass spins out of control. Who is the true monster here? The pathetic ex who lied to her, or the dark god who just swallowed her whole? With shaking hands, she leaves his contact open. We learn a hard truth here. The heaviest chains in life are often the ones we willingly refuse to lock. You and I need to pause right here and examine the wreckage of her mind. Jessica is still playing the desperate role of the protective anchor, texting her relentlessly. We literally watch Lena's face harden like stone as she builds a terrifying new reality. She practices this flat, emotionless tone, actively lying to the only person on earth trying to save her. She texts back that the stalker is totally blocked and she is safe. When Jessica pushes back, sensing the wrong notes in the text, Lena uses her pounding headache as a cheap disguise to end the conversation. It is a brutal life lesson for any of us watching. The exact moment we start lying to the people who truly love us, we are already lost. She is actively walling herself inside her own tomb, completely severing her lifelines just to protect the monster who is waiting for her in the dark. The camera aggressively snaps back to the glowing phone screen. Our secondary antagonist has officially entered the stage. Marcus sends a pathetic, desperate text, begging for just 10 minutes of her time in a public coffee shop. We hear Lena let out this dry, incredibly hollow breath. It sounds entirely devoid of any humor. She holds 7 long years of miserable, intimate data on this man. She knows his tragic flaw better than anyone. Marcus operates entirely on relentless emotional erosion. If she locks the door, he will simply throw his body against the wood until the frame splinters. He does not comprehend the basic language of boundaries. It reminds us that toxic people often view our firm rejections as mere pauses in their own script. He will just apply a suffocating, pathetic pressure until his victim finally shatters and submits to his will. Lena attempts to build a fortress of rigid rules, dictating the exact hour and the precise cafe, promising to walk away if Marcus is late. He replies with a flood of desperate affection, washing over her like freezing rain. You and I have probably watched this tragedy play out before. That fragile moment a fractured soul rejects a safe harbor. She considers calling Jessica her only healthy anchor. Her fingers merely hover over the screen, paralyzed by cognitive dissonance. Instead, driven by a dark craving for a deadlier guardian, she texts Adrian. She frames it casually, pretending she expects no intervention. But here is a simple lesson we all learn eventually. We so often run from a familiar, dying fire, only to throw ourselves straight into the arms of a devastating inferno. Adrian replies in under a minute, illuminating her darkened room. He sends a flawlessly calculated sentence. "Thank you for telling me. There are no demands or suffocating threats." It is a terrifying sign of her deep trauma bond that these simple words instantly calm her violently shaking hands. They soothe her in a way no healthy love ever could. The following hours dissolve into a heavy, gray blur. She lies completely motionless, staring at the ceiling with an untethered spirit. When the time finally comes, she drapes herself in an oversized coat, silently begging the world not to perceive her. She walks slowly to the cafe and takes a seat beside the cold window. Life so often teaches us that the silent, agonizing anticipation of pain is far heavier than the actual blow itself. The scene unfolds beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the cafe. Marcus walks in 8 minutes late, executing a calculated test of her boundaries. He plays the broken lover to absolute perfection. His hair is deliberately damp, his eyes bloodshot, his shoulders slumped in a theatrical display of surrender. He reaches across the wooden table, desperately trying to touch her hand and spark the ghost of their shared past. She pulls back instantly, her spine stiffening against the chair. Right on cue, the hellies begin to fall. For 7 long years, this exact performance would have sent her rushing to comfort his engineered pain. But today is different. Sometimes, it takes the arrival of a terrifying new darkness to make us finally immune to the haunting shadows of our past. Lena watches his chest heave with sobs, yet she feels absolutely nothing. His weeping registers as background noise, as though she is watching a tragic film about a stranger. Starved of her sympathy, Marcus spirals into a panicked defense. He viciously tears down the woman he cheated with, trying to use his own fabricated loneliness as a weapon. Lena merely looks at him with hollow eyes. She reminds him that while he was seeking comfort in someone else's bed, she was sitting alone through a 14-hour medical nightmare with her mother. He begs openly, promising therapy, pleading with her to remember their history. But her mind is finally clear. True closure only arrives when we finally realize that the person who burned the bridge down is the one crying over the ashes. Let us pay close attention to this exact moment. Marcus buries his face in his trembling hands, sobbing that he loves her. Lena looks at him, her voice dropping to a whisper, telling him he has no idea what love actually means. When he lifts his head, the tears remain, but a chilling shift alters his face. The pathetic pleading vanishes, replaced by a cold paranoia. Who is he? He demands. Lena blinks, caught off guard. Marcus leans in, aggressively insisting she is hiding another man. He whispers frantically about two dark figures he saw outside her door last night. Men who moved with lethal precision are unlike ordinary guards. Here is a harsh truth we must learn. A desperate need to control someone often hides right behind the fragile mask of a broken heart. Who is he, Lena? The paranoid question hangs in the stale air. Her nervous system instantly registers the danger. Her heart hammers against her ribs, even though her face remains a perfectly unreadable mask. There is no one else, she replies quietly. He hisses that she is lying. Lena leans across the table, dropping her voice to a calm, deadened pitch. She tells him that even if she had found someone new 5 minutes after they ended, it is no longer his business. He lost every right to her on Tuesday. It is a human truth that challenging a fragile ego always invites destruction. The weeping victim disappears in a flash. His jaw tightens, his face twisting into the same cruel sneer he used to terrify a young waiter years ago. "Do not make me look stupid, Lena," he warns softly. He is terrified of being the punchline, a pathetic fool whose woman left him for a Manhattan elite. "Marcus, this is completely over," Lena states with unwavering finality. She gathers her coat, preparing to leave forever. That is when the physical violence begins. His hand shoots out, fingers locking hard around her wrist. It is not tight enough to shatter bone, but firm enough to remind her who is stronger. Time seems to stop. Staring down at his knuckles in the middle of a crowded cafe on Lexington Avenue, a wave of detachment washes over her. We often spend years sleeping next to people we never truly knew. "Sit down," Marcus orders, his voice dripping with malice. She barely breathes as she demands he let go. Behind the counter, a terrified barista watches in total silence. You and I have seen the tragedy of the silent crowd unfold before. A woman 2 tables over stares. An older man lowers his newspaper to watch, yet the entire room is paralyzed. Lena knows the dark rule of public violence. When an abuser takes hold, the world turns to stone and leaves you to bleed alone. But today, the universe brings a violent anomaly. A large, gloved hand descends onto Marcus' shoulder, applying a terrifying, steady pressure. The hand belongs to a man draped in a heavy charcoal overcoat. "Sir," a deeply calm, velvety voice murmurs. "Let go of the lady's arm." Marcus jerks his head up. His face cycles from raw confusion to the dawn of recognition, to absolute terror. He drops her wrist as if her skin is boiling. Adrian Voss is standing right behind him. Adrian looks immaculate, exuding a quiet, suffocating menace. His dark hair is styled with precision, framing eyes of hollow, dead gray, a color that seems to swallow the light from the room. Masterfully wielding his psychological dominance, Adrian never even glances at Lena. His predatory focus is locked entirely on Marcus. "Mr. Bell," he commands in a whisper, "stand up." Marcus stammers, trying to play the brave man, but the weight of Adrian's presence crushes him. "Stand up." Marcus rises immediately, like a man stripped of his free will. Here is a lesson in dominance. True power never raises its voice. It simply expects the world to obey. Adrian speaks in a smooth rhythm. He orders Marcus to walk out, turn left, and never look back. No calls, no texts. The excision is surgical. "Are we clear?" Adrian asks, his tone devoid of warmth. Marcus tries to puff out his chest to hold on to a shred of pride. Adrian simply repeats the question with a terrifying absolute stillness. "Are we clear?" Lena watches the illusion of her ex-boyfriend shatter into jagged pieces. The man who tormented her for 7 years shrinks into a trembling, frightened child. "Yeah, we are clear," Marcus chokes out. He scrambles for the door, entirely broken, never daring to glance over his shoulder. The tension in the cafe slowly evaporates. People return to their coffees, pretending they did not just witness a masterclass in psychological destruction. It is frightening how quickly society will ignore the monsters walking among them. Only then does Adrian slowly turn his hollow eyes to look at Lena. "Are you all right?" he murmurs. Lena cannot speak. She feels as though she is floating outside her own body, staring blankly at her wrist. 4 angry marks are already rising on her skin, forming a brutal map of Marcus's cowardly grip. Adrian's cold gaze drops to follow hers, locking onto the bruises. Then the perfect mask slips. A terrifying flicker of raw violence passes over his meticulously crafted features. It is a microscopic tremor of absolute destruction, the kind of ancient, lethal rage that tells your primal instincts to run for your life. She sees the true monster hiding beneath the charcoal coat. "I am fine," she whispers, desperately trying to build a wall between them. He tells her clinically that she is not. She looks away, reminding him she had asked him to stay away. He replies with chilling logic, stating that dropping her location was an invitation, not a boundary. When her legs refuse to back down, he decides they will walk. He steps close, placing a large hand gently against the small of her back. There is no force, just the terrifying illusion of safe guidance. Lena realizes with a sickening twist that this dangerous stranger's touch is not triggering her panic. Let us remember this together. Life's most fatal mistakes are usually made when a predator makes you feel momentarily safe. She walks with him down the cold avenue until a sleek, black sedan glides silently against the curb. "Get in," Adrian commands. Finally, the dormant alarm bells in her mind begin to scream, and she refuses to step into the dark. Adrian's gaze locked onto Lena, performing a cold surgical dissection of her panic. Neon streetlights reflected in his dark eyes as a ghost of a smile broke his stillness. "Smart girl," he murmured, his voice a velvet rumble rewarding her survival instinct. "You and I know this dance well. It is exactly how a predator manufactures the illusion of sanctuary." He gave a hushed command, and his black sedan slinked away into the fog. He offered to walk her home, vowing he would ask for nothing else. Her breath plumed in the freezing air as she demanded why his word should mean anything. "Because where I come from, it is the only thing that does." This is a chilling confession of a violent world. Sometimes the darkest monsters strictly obey their own twisted codes. The simple truth we find here is that a villain's strict rules never equal real morality. The pavement swallowed their footsteps for agonizing blocks. Freezing wind masked the violent tremors shaking Lena's frame. He grabbed my wrist. She whispered to the concrete, unable to meet his eyes. Adrian's response was a mathematically smooth confirmation. He had seen everything. As she poured out her disbelief at the crowd's apathy, the truth of his timeline dawned on her. "You were in the shop the whole time," she realized, her voice trembling. He had stood in the shadows, actively watching her ex cross the line just so he could play the savior. "That is completely insane," she gasped. "Yes," he agreed instantly, utterly unashamed of his darkness. A helpless, broken laugh tore from her throat. We often laugh the loudest when we realize we are completely trapped. A simple lesson here is to always question the motives of someone who watches you suffer before deciding to save you. "I do not know what you want from me," she pleaded over the distant wail of a siren. Adrian halted beneath the amber glow of a street lamp. Slipping his hands into his heavy wool overcoat, he studied her. It was the detached gaze of a wolf evaluating a wounded deer, weighing the heavy cost of ownership. "I do not want anything from you," he murmured, deploying a masterclass in disorientation. He calmly listed his terms. No dates, no touch, no debts. He promised only to secure her safety, and then vanish like smoke. Clinging to the shattered remains of her logic, Lena whispered that she did not believe him. She knew absolute altruism is usually a mask.
That is all right,
He replied, immune to her resistance. A simple lesson to remember is when a person offers you absolute protection for nothing, they are often secretly planning to take everything. Then what are you doing? She challenged, her knuckles white as she gripped her purse. The silence that fell between them was suffocating, heavy with the unspoken violence of his past. Let us look closely at his face here. We see the tightening jaw, the hollow sorrow in his eyes. I am trying to find out whether I am still a man who can want something without taking it, he confessed softly. He was using her as a living test of his own monstrous restraint. That raw admission of predatory hunger paralyzed her completely. They walked the remaining blocks, wrapped in a heavy silence. At her building, he kept a stark physical distance, the perfect image of a disciplined guardian. Go inside, lock the door, sleep. 3 sharp commands, and a promise her ex was handled. The real lesson here is simple. True captivity begins the exact moment you mistake your cage for a safe fortress. Moving like a sleepwalker, Lena navigated the dim hallway of her building. The heavy metal deadbolt clicked shut like a prison gate. She slid down the unforgiving wood of the front door, dropping her coat in a crumpled heap. Pressing cold palms to her burning eyes, she tried to remember the woman she was just 2 days ago. But that life was gone, scorched away by the hypnotic presence of her new shadow. A sudden buzz from her coat pocket shattered the quiet. The glaring screen illuminated the dark room. I forgot to ask, did you eat today? A ruthless enforcer was suddenly playing the tender caker. The sheer absurdity snapped her frayed nerves. She let out a jagged laugh that quickly dissolved into violent sobs. It is a terrifying reality when the only person who can soothe your terror is the one causing it. A real lesson is to never seek comfort from the source of your destruction. She typed a single, defeated word. No. The silence stretched before his reply arrived, commanding and absolute. He told her a sandwich was waiting outside, paired with a chilling directive. Do not open the door until the footsteps fade. Instantly, the heavy thud of leather shoes echoed down her corridor. The sounds stopped inches from her spine, separated only by an inch of wood. No knock, no whisper, just the soft crinkle of paper hitting the carpet. The slow retreat of his boots followed, ending with the dull chime of the elevator. Lena sat frozen in the shadows, clutching her phone over her racing heart. In that breathless quiet, the chains of her new reality locked into place. You and I must understand the gravity of this moment. The real lesson is that we only grieve the loss of our old selves when the new version has fully surrendered to the dark. Picture Lena standing perfectly still under the harsh fluorescent light of her kitchen, mechanically eating the meal Adrian left behind. Notice how she refuses to sit down. Every muscle in her body is coiled tight, a physical reflection of the absolute chaos storming inside her mind. The sandwich is perfect. Fresh bread, thick meat, everything meticulously prepared. It is an intimate, quiet form of grooming. We are watching a predator anticipate a physical need to breed a deep, terrifying dependency. Her thoughts spun wildly. She felt completely insane, yet she could not stop eating his offering. Then, her phone violently vibrated. Jessica, Lee, do not greet me. Open the door. I am in your hallway. Lena gasped, nearly choking. A simple lesson is that the dark romantic illusions we build will always violently collide with the cold, unforgiving light of reality. Lena wiped her mouth like a child caught stealing, a primal flutter of guilt washing over her as she yanked the door open. Jessica stood in the dimly lit hall, a bag of groceries in her hand. Her sharp eyes were deadlocked on the crumpled brown paper on the counter. Jessica's face was an absolute mask of judgment. It was the fierce, uncompromising glare of a woman who refuses to be fooled. "Let me explain," Lena begged, her voice trembling. Setting her groceries down like a judge's gavel, Jessica crossed her arms, instantly building a wall between them. "You told me you blocked him," she stated, slicing right through the web of romantic lies. "I know," Lena choked out, all her fragile defenses shattering. "I lied to you. The simple life lesson here is clear. It is tragic how quickly we will betray our truest friends just to keep our new monsters close." "I lied, and I'm sorry," Lena whispered into the heavy air of the apartment. Jessica pinched the bridge of her nose, fighting to keep her anxiety in check before demanding every detail. Pacing the floor, Lena painted the entire agonizing scene: the sudden text, the claustrophobic coffee shop, Marcus exploding into a violent rage, grabbing her wrist, and then Adrian stepping out of the shadows like a dark god. Halfway the story, Jessica's knees gave out. She sank into a dining chair, burying her face in her trembling hands as the horrific reality took shape. "He stood there the entire time," Jessica murmured. "He watched your ex escalate the abuse before he stepped in." Lena froze. She had been so blinded by his rescue that she never noticed he allowed her terror to happen. A real lesson here is that a savior who waits for your absolute panic to step in is just another kind of abuser. Jessica's voice was a scalpel, actively dissecting the twisted romance Lena had built. "You and I must lean in here, because the truth Jessica unveils is terrifying. A normal person would have stopped the threat immediately," she pleaded. But Adrian let the aggression happen. He needed the contrast. He needed Marcus to be the screaming, out-of-control villain so Adrian could glide in as the flawlessly calm savior. It was not a lucky coincidence. It was a brilliantly choreographed stage play with Lena as the unwitting prize. The blood drained from Lena's face. She stood paralyzed as the shadow of his true manipulation consumed her. Jessica let out a long, exhausted sigh, like a friend forced to watch a train wreck. "Sit down," she commanded softly. "I am going to ask you a question, and you cannot lie to me. A simple lesson we find here is that highly calculated rescues are often just dark traps in disguise. Do you like him?" Jessica asked, slicing straight through the thick psychological fog. Lena immediately threw up her hands, stammering about her messy breakup 48 hours prior. But Jessica's dark eyes never wavered. She was hunting for the trauma bond, not casual dating advice. Lena's breath hitched. Her trembling hands betrayed the intoxicating confusion inside her. "I do not know," she whispered, her eyes wide with terrible shame. "There is this pull." "He is so calm, Jess. When he speaks, the screaming world just goes quiet. It is a fatal error of the human heart, mistaking a monster's cold lack of empathy for sheltering peace." "I know exactly how crazy this sounds," Lena cried, fully aware she was willingly walking into a trap. "The simple life lesson we see here is that silence and stillness do not always mean safety. Sometimes they are just the calmness of a predator." "I am not a fool," Lena insisted. She crossed her arms, desperately trying to shield her shattered ego. "You are a heartbroken woman being hunted by a dangerous man," Jessica fired back. She understood a timeless truth. Grief and sudden attention create perfect victims, not fools. Lena let out a miserable, broken laugh, clinging to his dark poetry. "But he told me his word means something," she pleaded. "He said He wants to see if he can want something without destroying it to take it. Jessica stared at her friend in absolute horror. The sheer, terrifying audacity of his script hung in the air like poison. He said that? Those exact words? Jessica rubbed her temples, looking physically sick. Lena, that is either a miracle of vulnerability or the most lethal sociopathic conditioning I have ever seen. The simple lesson is to never let poetic words blind you to the chilling reality of a person's actions. I honestly do not know which it is, Lena whispered into the heavy, suffocating air. A single amber lamp cast long shadows across the room, illuminating the wreckage of a normal evening. Between them sat a half-empty glass of wine, ticking away like an unexploded bomb. Finally, Jessica reached across the cold table, grabbing her friend's hand with desperate, steel-eyed conviction. "This is the protocol," she stated. "I will not demand you block him because that wall has already crumbled. But you have to slow this down. No isolated cars, no private homes. If he calls, it happens in broad daylight. You will report every single move to me. The lesson here is painfully simple. The exact moment we start negotiating with our own basic safety is the moment we have already lost control." Jessica refused to let go until she heard those boundaries spoken aloud. Public, daylight, safe places. Lena repeated the rules, her voice hollow and stripped of conviction. "Are you angry with me?" she asked, pleading for a lifeline. "No," Jessica whispered, tears finally breaking free. "I am just terrified of where this will end." Defenseless, Lena simply held on to her friend. They finished the wine, letting it dull the panic until Jessica collapsed. Alone in her dark bedroom, Lena lay under heavy shadows. The harsh white light of her phone glared from the nightstand. Adrian Voss did not reach out, not that night, and not for 3 agonizing days. We must remember this truth. Sometimes, the cruelest weapon someone can use against you is simply their deafening silence. It happened in the suffocating quiet of the second day. A physical ache settled deep in Lena's chest, cold and undeniable. She was going through withdrawal. She actually missed him. Her old life with Marcus was completely dead to her. Blocking his number felt like sweeping up dirt. But the dark, lifeless screen of her phone and that unfinished conversation with Adrian consumed every waking thought. Her eyes darted to the device constantly, and every blank screen landed like a physical blow. By the 3rd day, she was drowning in her own heavy shame. You and I must recognize the simple life lesson right here. True freedom is not merely escaping an abuser. It is recognizing the quiet chains we willingly hand over to the very next predator who walks into our lives. She paced the hardwood floors, desperate for logic to win out. "You are 29, she muttered to the empty room. "You own a home. You have a career. You cannot fall apart just because a dangerous man stopped texting you." She forced herself through the basic motions of surviving, folding laundry, buying groceries. But her eyes never left the phone. Finally, on the 4th evening at 7:42, a vibration shattered the quiet. "How are you, Lena?" She waited 1 agonizing minute. "I am functional," she replied. "How are you?" His response was a calculated drop of poison. "Better, now." Lena pressed her forehead against the freezing kitchen counter, letting out a broken, breathless laugh. The sad truth of life is that we hand over our greatest power the exact moment we convince ourselves we are still the ones in control. God help her. His psychological conditioning was perfect. Her fingers moved across the glass screen on their own, asking if he was around for coffee. His silence stretched out, pulling the invisible wire tighter around her throat. "Lena," he finally typed, "is that a wise course of action?" It was breathtaking cruelty. He was making her beg for her own ruin. You are asking me, she replied, her heart hammering, because I am forced to lie. Yes, tomorrow at Lexington. I am bringing my friend. She will be hostile. That is mathematically fair, he replied, completely unmoved. The date was set. The steel jaws of the trap were cranking open. The great tragedy of life is that our most fatal mistakes are never accidents. They are choices we make with our eyes wide open, willingly walking into the dark. Lena stood before the dim hallway mirror, watching herself split right down the middle. One side was the ghost of who she was just 5 days ago, relatively safe and tied to a cowardly man. The other was this strange new creature, speeding blindly toward absolute destruction. Staring deeply into her own hollow eyes, she truly did not know which version of herself was more dangerous. She called Jessica. At exactly 4 o'clock, they pushed open the heavy glass doors of the cafe. Adrian Voss was already there, swallowed in the shadows of a corner booth. Dark wool coat, black coffee. As they approached, he stood up slowly. Jessica stepped in front of Lena, her whole body bracing for an impact. The life lesson here is haunting but true. The monsters we run toward are often just clear reflections of the dangerous chaos we secretly crave deep inside ourselves. Miss Nguyen, Adrian murmured, extending a hand in a beautifully crafted illusion of respect. Jessica let it hang in the empty air between them. Sit down, she ordered, her voice cracking like winter ice. She flatly refused the waiter, accepting absolutely nothing from him. I am going to interrogate you, she warned, staring him down. I will be hostile. Adrian just smiled. What do you want with her? Jessica demanded. I am ensuring her stability, he replied smoothly. Because she intrigues me. You do not know her, Jessica snapped back. You ran a web search. Adrian's eyes went completely dead, instantly stripped of all human warmth. I did not use algorithms, he whispered. I deployed human assets to legally acquire her identity. Always remember this simple truth. Real, terrifying power never needs to scream or raise its voice. It just stares you down and quietly states the horrifying facts. I needed her to volunteer the information, Adrian explained, his voice smooth like velvet. Jessica leaned in, refusing to back down. Do you know about my prison record? She challenged. No, he replied without blinking. It was a flawless, chilling evasion. How do you make your money? She pressed harder. I manage logistics for my family, he answered calmly. Name 5 things you ship, she demanded. Adrian gave a slow smile, briefly warming his cold eyes. I must decline, he murmured. That proves my theory, Jessica shot back. Adrian leaned forward across the table to deliver his ultimate psychological hook. I have never allowed a woman to be harmed anywhere near me. It was a chilling masterclass in grooming. The lesson here is dark but fundamentally true. Predators do not show up holding a weapon. They arrive offering you absolute protection from the very world they are about to burn to the ground. Let us pause for a second. You and I need to truly look at Adrian Voss right now. We are watching the twisted anatomy of a megalomaniac actively at work. Notice his opening move. He looks Jessica dead in the eye and claims he never takes what is not freely. It is a beautiful, calculated lie, a way to build total dominance disguised perfectly as consent. And when she calls his bluff, he does not get angry. He leans closer, his voice dropping to a velvet whisper. Swearing his word is his only currency. It is a flawless performance of a wounded soul. You and I have probably both fallen for a trap like this. The life lesson is written in blood. The most dangerous predators alive will never bare their fangs at you. They simply smile, bow their heads, and quietly offer you a gentleman's promise. Listen closely to the cold words he chooses. He talks about human trust in pure economic terms, claiming that breaking a promise costs him manpower and capital. We are seeing a truly sociopathic mind at work, boiling human life down to simple math on a spreadsheet. Jessica sits across from this void, gripping the edge of the table, desperately holding her ground. She draws a fierce line. If he hurts Lena, if he lies or vanishes, she will rain absolute hell upon him. She thinks she is winning a high-stakes game against a monster, but she is just bleeding out in dark waters. We must learn this painful truth before it destroys us. Drawing a hard, emotional boundary with a true narcissist never actually protects you. It simply hands them a detailed, illuminated map of your absolute deepest vulnerabilities. But then, the heavy mask finally slips. Jessica leans in and threatens to drive to Connecticut, find his mother, and tell her exactly what kind of monster she raised. For one fraction of a second, Adrian actually loses his perfect balance. His dark eyes widen in love, and then, surprisingly, he laughs. It is not a cruel sneer. It is a warm, entirely genuine sound of shock. He admits it is the best threat he has heard in 15 years. In a rare, unscripted breath of honesty, he mutters that his mother still thinks he flips real estate. The iron doors of his soul creak open just an inch. The life lesson here is oddly comforting. No matter how dangerous or deeply broken a person becomes, shame still lives inside them. We all desperately try to hide the darkest parts of our souls from the very people who first gave us life. The cafe door closes. Jessica walks out, leaving Lena completely alone at the table with the apex predator. Lena nervously apologizes for her friend's anger. Adrian just waves it away. He leans back, shadows clinging to his face, whispering that it is refreshing to be threatened. It is a brilliant spin, making him look untouchable. The tension breaks, and Lena lets out a soft laugh. But you and I need to look closely at Adrian right now. He does not smile back. He sits in absolute stillness. He is not sharing a moment. He is scanning her, recording the way her eyes crinkle, cataloging the pitch of her voice. Remember this critical truth before you give your heart away. A healthy person looks at you to share a connection. A predator only looks at you to gather the exact data they need to eventually break you. The isolation phase begins with a cold, calculated move. Adrian mentions he will be gone for 5 days on unnamed business, starving Lena of his presence. So when she asks if he might be in danger, he offers silence. Instead, he slides a crisp white card across the table. 10 numbers. He softly commands her to use it, only if the absolute worst happens. It is a brilliant psychological anchor. He is planting a time bomb in her head, guaranteeing she will spend the next week suffocating on dread. The lesson here is simple, and we see it happen in real life all the time. When someone forces you to constantly panic about whether they will survive the night, it is never an accident. It is a deliberate trap, designed so you have absolutely no energy left to protect your own heart. He seals the cage with a final whisper. After drowning her in fear, he throws her a lifeline, a promise of dinner when he returns. He leans in, murmuring that needing nothing from her is wildly different from wanting to sit across from her. It sounds like dark, bruised poetry. Paralyzed by the emotional whiplash, Lena watches him fade into the city streets. She completely ignores her ringing phone. She does not call the friend who always protected her. She just sits in the dark, staring at that terrifying white card. Stick with me here, because you and I are watching a familiar tragedy unfold. The darkest truth of human attachment is how quickly we will abandon the people who truly care about us, just to chase the fleeting thrill of a monster's attention. Picture the framing of this scene. 5 agonizing days of absolute, suffocating silence. The camera lingers on that white card, resting on the counter, vibrating with manufactured tension. Then, the inevitable trigger is pulled. At exactly 6:14 in the morning, the harsh ring of her phone shatters the quiet. It is an unlisted number. You and I know this exact feeling. Her nervous system recognizes the impending doom before her rational mind catches up. A coarse, unfamiliar voice calmly states that a specific situation has unfolded exactly as Mr. Voss promised. Her descent into a psychological prison starts here. It is a bitter reality to swallow, but the agonizing anticipation of a disaster will slowly destroy your mind long before the actual ruin ever arrives. We need to watch her face in this crucial moment. The anonymous voice on the line confirms that Adrian is bleeding, wounded, but still breathing. The handler spits out rapid commands. She must be ready in exactly 11 minutes, carry nothing but her phone, and speak to no one. Secrecy is the fertile soil where toxic devotion takes root. Lena sits completely frozen on the edge of her unmade bed, the dead phone still pressed to her ear. A terrifying icy clarity washes over her features. She stares at her bedroom door, fully aware, fear, that turning that handle means stepping into an abyss that will swallow her whole. This is the core of human tragedy. When we willingly surrender our own light just to pull a broken monster out of the shadows, we condemn ourselves to live in the dark forever. She moves like a ghost through her apartment, obeying orders without a whisper of resistance. The camera tracks her, leaving her old life behind, stepping past the landline, crushing the urge to call a friend for help. Down on the street, she hates Spiller. His face is a blank map of cold brutality. He opens the door of a black sedan. As she slides into the back seat, the door slams shut with the muffled thud of military-grade armor. Lena stares through the reinforced glass, yet her lips remain completely sealed. Her psychological surrender is well underway. She is actively locking herself inside the terrifying prison of his dark world. It is a heavy truth to carry, but the most inescapable cages in this life are always the ones we quietly walk into ourselves. Trapped inside the sterile cabin of the moving vehicle, her voice finally breaks the silence to demand answers. The driver hesitates, then yields, acknowledging her tragic place in this violent hierarchy. He tells her a negotiation shattered into gunfire, leaving Adrian with bullets buried in his shoulder and ribs. He flatly states they do not use hospitals, but then he delivers the fatal strike. He says Adrian has been calling her name since the moment he woke up. The camera pushes in close on Lena. This perfectly feeds the devastating savior complex so common in toxic romance. Believing that a dangerous, powerful man desperately needs you creates a beautiful illusion of control, masking the brutal reality that you are actually at his complete mercy. Her panic threatens to tear her apart. We see her chest rising and falling as she tries to count her breaths, a desperate grounding rhythm her mother taught her while her father was dying. But logic cannot stop a heart hijacked by fear. As the sedan pulls into the hidden compound, the driver turns to face her with a chilling directive. He warns her that Adrian is a ruin of blood and bruised flesh, commanding her to hide any flicker of horror from her eyes. Let us pause and recognize the deep tragedy here. She is being conditioned to swallow her own humanity just to protect a predator's fragile ego. It is a cruel dynamic we must all learn to avoid. The moment you erase your own genuine terror to comfort the very monster who dragged you into the dark, your soul no longer belongs to you. The safe house breathes with a cold, sociopathic rhythm. Shadows shift as armed guards and an underground doctor move around her. They look right through Lena, treating her as an inevitable variable in their master's bloody equation. Nobody asks her name because her identity is already dead. She is simply Adrian's newest possession. They guide her into a makeshift surgical room. Adrian lies pale against the sheets, his chest wrapped in crimson-soaked bandages, a violent bruise blooming across his jaw. Everything in this frame is engineered to shatter her emotional defenses. It teaches us a grim truth about toxic relationships. For a true megalomaniac, even the sight of their own bleeding wounds is a calculated weapon, used to permanently chain a devoted caretaker to their side. Let us look closely at this tragic reunion. A guard steps aside, and Adrian's dark eyes find hers. Instantly, he deploys a masterful trap. He whispers that she never should have come. This cruelty forces Lena to actively declare that she wants to be there. We watch her sink onto the edge of the mattress. Her trembling fingers reach out to hold his cold hand, a devastating gesture that seals her doom. Adrian tightens his grip, laughing off the bullet holes. Lena leans in, tears falling, begging him to stop joking. She genuinely thinks she is healing a broken man. The painful life lesson here is how dangerously blind our empathy can make us. She is completely unaware of the terrifying reality that she is simply offering her bare, unprotected heart to a starving wolf. The camera stays tight on his face as he reveals his bloody truth. His tone is terrifyingly calm, outlining a brutal 30-year war with a rival criminal empire. He speaks of severed lives as if discussing the weather. Then, the master manipulator plays his most devastating card. After dragging her into his suffocating darkness, he turns his face away and orders her to leave. He firmly commands her to walk right out the door. It is psychological warfare at its peak. By violently pushing her away, he ensures she will desperately fight to stay. Here is a vital warning for anyone trying to save a toxic person. The most terrifying predators in life do not bother building cages. They simply hand you the padlock and quietly watch you lock yourself inside. Let us examine the brilliant cruelty of this moment. Adrian performs the classic illusion of the noble sacrifice. He tells Lena his driver is waiting to take her far away. He paints a bleak picture of her future, commanding her to marry some boring office worker and forget he existed. He whispers that loving him is a fatal mistake she must run from. You and I both know this is not an act of mercy. By insulting her potential, he guarantees her fierce pride will make her reject the offer. He never intended to let her walk out that door. The lesson is sinister but incredibly real. A true manipulator does not force you to stay. They simply twist the narrative until throwing your life away for their darkness feels like your own beautiful, romantic decision. He confesses, his voice heavy with regret, that his experiment has failed. He claims he wanted to see if a man carved out of violence could desire a woman without destroying her. He admits his affection draws rival wolves to tear apart his prize. Then comes the masterful shift. His voice actually breaks. For Lena, watching this terrifying apex predator shatter before her eyes is pure intoxication. She stares at his ruined body, the bloody gauze, the dark contusions. This is the tragic birth of her fatal attachment. All logic evaporates, leaving only a blinding, irrational devotion. The vital life lesson to remember is this. When we look at a bleeding monster and decide our love can fix them, the outside world ceases to exist and we are lost forever. She absolutely refuses to leave his side. Let's pause and watch this frame closely. The camera circles Lena as she quietly seals her own doom with a deeply unsettling calm. Adrian closes his eyes, painting a flawless portrait of a truly defeated man. She announces she is not walking away, entirely locked onto his broken, shivering frame. In this moment, she elevates herself to the dangerous role of his sole protector. She promises to get water, anchor herself to that wooden chair, and wait in the dark until the doctor returns. She demands his total surrender. A heavy, quiet pause fills the room before Adrian finally nods. Lena drops his hand and heads for the door, but stops cold, gripping the wooden frame. She refuses to look back, taking a breath to deliver her heartbreaking vow. The simple truth here: when we try to save a broken person, we often end up breaking ourselves. Staring into the empty corridor, her voice carries the heavy weight of old, unhealed wounds. She uses her own painful past to justify this brand new madness, bringing up Marcus, the coward who stole 7 years of her youth. She lists every humiliating betrayal, lying to his parents, waiting blindly while he slept with other women. She fiercely promises her days of being thrown away are finally over. The bitter irony hangs thick in the air. She actually believes that chaining her soul to a dangerous criminal is an act of real rebellion. She vows she will never be sent away for her own protection again. On the bed, Adrian just smiles. The steel trap has snapped shut from the inside. It reminds us that running from our past often leads us straight into a much darker future. For 2 days, Lena disappears into the shadows of his underground life. You and I have seen how these dark spaces slowly digest a new soul. Marta, the quiet housekeeper, becomes the architect of her conditioning. She leads Lena to a soft bed, brings warm meals, and whispers that Mr. Voss is a very good man as long as he has the right reason to be. She places the heavy burden of a killer's morality right onto Lena's shoulders. By the 3rd morning, the doctor clears him. The drive back into the neon city lights is perfectly silent, their fingers tightly laced together. But the second Lena opens her front door, her 2 worlds crash together. Jessica is waiting in the dark. We learn quickly that the secrets we hide will always find a way to meet us right at our own front door. Jessica represents the safe reality Lena is casually throwing away. The room feels heavy with pure panic, days of missed calls, frantic text messages, and an intervention built around cold takeout food. Jessica stands completely rigid, arms crossed, demanding to know where her best friend went. But the moment the door clicks shut, the fake strength shatters. Lena falls hard onto the sofa. A terrifying sob rips through her throat. This is not the standard crying of a bad breakup. This is the violent collapse of a person surviving pure psychological warfare. Seeing her friend break, Jessica drops her anger and falls to her knees, pulling Lena into a fierce hug. It is a harsh reminder that true loyalty often forces us to hold on to people, even as they blindly pull us down into the dark. Think about the heavy, quiet air in this small kitchen. The silence stretches out, completely suffocating, while Lena finally spills her darkest truths. A normal friend might yell, might reach for the phone to call for help, but Jessica just stares. Her hands move on autopilot, scraping leftover food onto a porcelain plate. The sharp sound of the fork is the only noise in the room. When the meal is done, Jessica leans across the table, her eyes totally blank. She is not going to stop this tragedy. She spent days trying to build walls of logic to save Lena, only to watch them fall apart. The crying, broke girl from 2 weeks ago is gone. Now, someone hardened by a terrifying bond sits in her place. The hardest truth of love is realizing you cannot save someone who refuses to be saved. Jessica lays out the terms of her defeat, disguising it as fierce friendship. You can hear the slight shake in her voice when she threatens to call Lena's mother if she ever disappears again. It is a very weak fence trying to hold back a storm. Leaning over the wooden table, Jessica seals their promise. She brings up old childhood vows, painting a terrible picture of the years to come. She imagines the police raids, the bright flash of public scandal, and Lena showing up in 10 years, bruised and holding a baby. It is a deeply painful, bleeding kind of loyalty. Unconditional shelter can actually be a fatal gift. By offering a safe place to land, she pushes Lena right into the fire. A safety net means nothing if it simply gives someone the blind courage to finally jump off a cliff. Jessica softly promises her door will always be open, even if Lena decides to live an ordinary, quiet life. That simple truth makes Lena completely break down. Her loud, raw weeping fills the silent apartment. Then 3 whole weeks pass in a blurry haze. Watch Adrian closely in this phase. He moves slowly, acting like a wounded animal testing its legs. He sets up all their meetings in deep shadows, eating in dark, nameless places away from watching anyone. Late one Thursday night, under the ugly yellow glow of a street lamp, he gives her one quick, cold kiss before vanishing into the night. He is carefully controlling her hunger, giving out love in tiny drops. It is a painful lesson for anyone watching. We often mistake the slow starvation of our own hearts for wild, burning romance. The past is officially dead with one short text message. Her old tormentor is out of the picture for good, but a mind used to chaos simply cannot handle the quiet. Lena starts telling herself a beautiful, deadly lie. She somehow convinces herself the sudden violence of their first meeting was just a mistake. She truly believes she can dance right on the very edge of Adrian's criminal empire without falling all the way in. It is a peaceful fantasy, but it is as fragile as thin glass. The peace lasts for exactly 22 days. The sky is a dull, flat gray when the dream violently breaks. She is walking home, holding a small pharmacy bag, when a dark figure steps away from the brick wall. It reminds us all that ignoring the danger never actually stops the cold storm from finally hitting. Stick with me as we watch this unfold on the busy sidewalk. The tall stranger grabs her elbow, his hand clamping down hard like a steel trap. He speaks very calmly, his voice completely empty of feeling, telling her not to run away, but Lena refuses to show weakness. Her jaw sets, and she loudly tells him to let go. A cold, bitter smile creeps onto his face. He leans in close, smelling heavily of old tobacco, and casually names exactly where Adrian is right now. He knows Adrian is sitting in a diner on 58th Street. This man is a hired gun, and he understands that to break the king, he has to capture the queen. He lets her go, but steps even closer, his dark shadow covering her. The reality is that true fear rarely needs a gun. Sometimes, just the right words can easily stop your heart. The stranger twists the mental knife with skill, handing her a cold warning. Adrian has until Friday to show up alone and pay for his past sins. If he does not, this man is taking a drive to Baltimore, right to her mother's front door. You can see the color leave Lena's face. Her breathing stops. Her heartbeat pounds wildly in her neck as she asks how long he has watched them. The man's eyes look empty as he delivers the final blow. He softly explains that he does not actually need to hurt her mother, as long as Lena truly believes he will. Just like that, he fades into the busy crowd. Lena stays frozen on the concrete. The lesson here is brutal. True terror never makes us scream. It simply steals our voice completely, leaving us alone in the quiet. For one long minute, Lena stands like a stone statue on the avenue. She swallows the sharp, bitter taste of pure fear, forcing her shaking hands to calm down. She never even reaches for her phone to call the police. Instead, she throws herself directly into the jaws of the danger. At exactly 4:31, She shoves open the heavy doors of the dark diner on 58th Street, squeezing the paper bag in her hand. She walks right past the angry waiter, her eyes completely locked on Adrian sitting across the room. He is busy talking, but the moment he sees the pure terror in her face, he stands up and moves toward her. You and I have probably both made this exact mistake. We run right back into the burning building, fully convinced that our deep love can magically put out the wildfire. Adrian guides her out onto the street, his hand wrapping hard around her waist. From a distance, it looks like a lover's hug, but it is the firm grip of a man protecting his property. Under the fading sun, Lena explains the threat with the cold emotion of a ghost. She does not drop a single tear. Her panic has burned away, leaving an empty shell. Watch Adrian's face as he processes this attack on his hidden empire. The muscles in his jaw turn into solid stone. His eyes go completely dark and still, carrying the same terrifying quietness she saw weeks ago. It is the dangerous look of a wild predator preparing to strike. We soon learn that real human evil rarely yells or screams at you. It simply enters your life in total, suffocating silence. Look closely at the screen here. Lena's survival instinct has narrowed down to a microscopic twitch near Adrian's eye as she reads his dark moods. Watch how smoothly he strips away her autonomy, framing his total control as a desperate act of romance. He orders her to pack for Baltimore, giving her 60 minutes before armed enforcers turn her mother's quiet home into a bunker. She whispers a question about the blood he is about to spill, but he cuts her off. His heavy hands cup her cheeks, tilting her face upward in a gesture that looks tender but is actually a physical trap. He whispers a promise of safety. Life teaches a bitter lesson in moments like this. We so easily mistake severe control for deep affection, forgetting that absolute safety always comes at the cost of our freedom. This is where the trap finally snaps shut. Adrian softens his voice, constructing a scenario where her surrender feels like an independent choice. He tells her to simply get on the train, to look away from the slaughter, and promises they will sort out the wreckage later. It is a terrifying illusion of free will, but you and I know the chains were forged long ago. Lena looks into his eyes and caves. She whispers that she has belonged to him since that quiet morning they shared over coffee, surrendering to the monster's warped reality. The lesson here is a brutal testament to human survival. When the strain becomes too heavy to carry, the mind aggressively rewrites its own instincts, tragically turning the very predator who hunts you into the only sanctuary that can save you. The tragedy seals itself the moment Lena swears she will never return to the normal world. She binds herself to his shadows, choosing to ignore the brutal violence he is about to unleash. Hearing this, a solitary tear slips down Adrian's cheek. We are left to wonder if this is a genuine crack in his armor, or the ultimate psychological manipulation. Lena justifies her dissent, desperately telling herself that because Adrian understands his own darkness, he is a better savior than her past abusers. For 5 days, 2 armed men sit on her mother's floral sofa, sipping coffee and speaking to the older woman with chilling politeness. It teaches a haunting truth about adaptation. We will gladly hand over the key to our own prison as long as the warden offers us a comforting smile. Notice how the sickness bleeds right into the walls. By Wednesday, the air smells of baked apples as her mother serves pie to the hitman, entirely normalizing the nightmare. Lena refuses to turn on the evening news, shutting her eyes to keep her fantasy alive. When Adrian finally calls, his voice is a low, victorious hum. Her breathless plea for him to bring her home marks the absolute end of her soul. A year then fades away. We now find Lena standing behind the glass of a penthouse, a heavy diamond resting on her finger. The man who once threatened her has simply vanished, and she never asks why. True moral decay is rarely a loud, dramatic fall from grace. It is usually just a series of quiet, comfortable compromises easily swallowed down with a morning cup of coffee. The glare of the phone cuts through the dark room, revealing the tragic softness in her eyes. It vibrates against the wood, a sharp demand from Adrian. It acts as a digital leash. Yet watch how her tense shoulders relax. She texts back that she is safe, smiling at what she believes is true affection. This nightmare began with one wrong number that hooked a violent syndicate boss. Now, she looks at a ruthless criminal and sees only a devoted protector. You and I have followed this story to its end, and the final lesson is heavy. The unhealed wounds of our past often make our choices for us, carefully dressing up our absolute worst mistakes to look like beautiful destiny. She has finally found her gilded cage, and she will happily turn the lock herself every single day.